When I reached Tahsis the day before my launch, there was a high southerly wind blowing, possibly 25-30 knots on the inlet. But the locals down at the launch told me that mornings were usually fairly calm. After a night at a forestry campsite, I got to the boat launch around 7:30 in the morning, and I was on the water fairly promptly. Perfect conditions.
Tahsis Inlet, 8 o'clock in the morning, June 4th. Perfect weather. Belmont Inlet. Steamer Point. And the wind has come up. Of course, it's wind against.
When I reached the bay at Garden Point, I could see that the tide was too shallow to allow me to get into the beach. So I opted to go around the westerly islets outside the stream, find the stream, and hope to line my boat up the stream to get to the main beach. On day 2, I departed camp at Garden Point as soon in the morning as possible, while the tide was still high enough to allow me to float much of the stream channel to the shallow saltwater at the mouth. The marine forecast was calling for a strong northwest winds in the range of 25 to 35 knots, combined with a 2-meter ocean swell, so I was keen to cover as much distance as possible early in the day. Unfortunately, probably because of my initial rush to launch, I failed to check the 360 camera. Only later did I discover at camp that it was shooting footage in 180 mode, facing backwards to my direction of travel. After about an hour of paddling, I stopped for a short break at Rosa Island, finding it to be a very pleasant spot. Once I'd left Rosa Islet, I decided to stay on the inside of Waish Island and attempt to cross the gravel spit at the south end of it. However, the spit was no longer covered by the ebbing tide when I reached it, so I had to drag my boat across a 50-foot strip of gravel using my foam landing pads to ease the transit. The other flaw in my filming on this day of paddling was that I chose not to use the GoPro, which faces forward mostly, and as a result I only have this backwards looking footage from the 360 set on 180. The sea was roaring pretty hard outside the reefs of Nuchatlitz Park as I paddled south. As I was approaching the south end of the shelter of the reefs through Nuchatlitz, I found that the outside waters were getting quite uncomfortably rough. So rather than travel much further, I decided to head to Belmont Point for some shelter there. After landing and hauling my boat to safety above the surf, I went down the beach and I found that there was a great water source. So I decided to make camp here for a couple of nights, and it turned out to be a wonderful spot, great views, and great hiking and beach combing, perfect tranquility.
It seems like it has or was used by the Earth peoples as a village, probably like a fishing camp. The top of this dune has been leveled out.
The winds had calmed considerably during my two-night stay at Belmont Point Beach. And when it was time to head out, I had fairly calm seas for the first part of the day. Headed to the outside around Nuchatlitz Park and ultimately to Rosa Islet for the night. Well, I could have stayed at one of the outside islands. The wind forecast was again quite strong, so I chose instead to head more inside. Landed at the beach in front of Chewish, Chewish campground, a campsite. Rosa Island right there. I found Chewish Island to be quite pretty, the campsite looking very nice, but when I landed I could see that there was quite a bit of wind coming in from the outside, and it had quite a bite to it, so I decided instead to carry on to Rosa as I had planned.
See ya. Yeah, likewise. Will do.
Well, the earlier forecast had called for strong westerly winds and a large ocean swell. By the time I got to the outside of Rosa Island to have a look, it was calm, and it was a very pleasant evening. After the calm evening, I figured I'd get a pretty good night's sleep. But around midnight, an enormous wind hit my tent blowing from the east. I had to get out and tie it down better. But it was calm the next morning. The first day of the return into the inlets, I planned a mid-morning stop at Garden Point, and then reaching Saltery Bay for camp.
Garden Point area, just outside the creek. Saltery Bay, just west of Steamer Point. Supposed to be a stream here.
At Saltery Bay, I found a great campsite just behind the beach. I also found there was a nice little stream for fresh water, and I had a swim, and then a young couple showed up in a double. Final evening was perfect, and then I'd planned the next day to be a relatively short paddle to Tahsis, getting there perhaps mid-afternoon. The couple in the double headed out just ahead of me, and I was underway in relatively calm water.
Just passing Steamer Point before the wind comes up. Was not expecting this. The wind is supposed to be from the other direction.